Hi guys, Mr. Sonnenberg here. Today we're going to be talking about the human immune system. This is for Science 24 students studying Unit 3, and this is topic 2 in our course material. And today we're going to be looking at basically how our body fights off infection and protects ourselves against infection, or what happens when we don't fight off against infection. So I have a lot of slides here, and I'm going to try to breeze through some of them as quick as I can so that this doesn't take long, and I have to apologize about the length of the screencast. Typically I like to keep them under 10 minutes, but in this topic too, there's been a ton of course material. So first we're going to talk about what the immune system is. So basically it is the body's defense against disease-causing organisms, malfunctioning cells, or foreign particles. So our first line of defense that we have to know about is our skin. So there's a few different aspects of the first line of defense. So basically our skin carries bacteria on it. So the dead outer layer of skin, known as the epidermis, that's what our skin is, forms a shield against invaders. And then also it secretes chemicals that kill potential invaders. So what it basically happens is we shed between 40 and 50,000 skin cells every day. But there's actually bacteria all over our skin. And that's the good bacteria, the helpful bacteria that's going to even help us, and our skin's very thick, that's going to help us to protect ourselves. Now, along with that first line of defense, we have mucus and cilia. So as we breathe in foreign particles, every time we breathe in foreign particles. So why do we have nose hair? Well, because it collects some of those foreign particles as well. So when we breathe in foreign particles, bacteria bump into mucus throughout the respiratory system in our lungs, which is the respiratory, and they can become stuck in there. So then hair-like structures called cilia sweep the mucus into the throat for coughing or swallowing, so we can get rid of those bacteria, or we can move them into our system and we can kill them with the acids. But don't swallow bacteria have a good chance of infecting you? That would be a good question to ask yourself. So if I swallow that bacteria, can it infect us? Well, a lot of times it's killed because of the acids in our stomach. Again, with the first line of defense, we have saliva. So what's the first thing you do when you cut your finger? Well, you put it in your mouth. I cut it and I suck on it, right? Well, what the saliva actually contains is many chemicals, and those chemicals are actually going to break down that bacteria. So we have thousands of different types of bacteria, and they can survive these chemicals though. So just because we do that doesn't mean that we're going to necessarily kill that bacteria right off the bat. There's a bunch of different bacteria that can actually survive against those chemicals. We also have stomach acid. So now when we swallow things, the stomach acid that sits, well, in our stomach, and that's how we digest food, right? Saliva, and we break it down, we chew it, it goes down our esophagus, okay, and then turns into a paste as it churns in our stomach. But if we swallow the bacteria and they're broken down, well, they're broken down by extremely strong acids in our stomach. And why do we get heartburn? Well, those strong acids, we have a lining in our stomach that protects us from the burning of the acids. But when we get heartburn, when the acids come up into our esophagus, what actually happens is it burns, as we don't have that protective layer on our esophagus. But they actually can break down our food, but they can also kill some of these bacteria. So the stomach produces a coating and a special mucus that acid won't break through. So we want to think of our body as a hollow plastic tube. So basically, food is digested within the hole of the tube, but it never actually enters the solid plastic tube itself, okay? And so basically the tube inner surface would be our digestive system, the tube outer surface would be our skin, and then the plastic interior body, that would be our body, okay? Okay, so basically if we had E. coli as a common plentiful in all of our digestive tracts, so we have a lot of E. coli, so why are we not sick all the time? So basically the bacteria are technically outside the body and they aid in digesting material we cannot. So only if E. coli are introduced in an unnatural manner can they break through the first line of defense. And remember our first line of defense, so we have that mucus, and then in our tonsils, and then we have down in our respiratory, and then we also have our skin, okay, and we have our saliva, and we have our stomach acid as our first line of defense. But what is the second line of defense? So those are kind of our physical lines of defense, and we have those, but what are our second lines? So if those don't work, then what happens? So we call these foreign bodies, we call those invaders. And so if they actually get within our body, then we have white blood cells. And we talked about components of the blood. Well, these white blood cells are the ones that fight off the infection. So they'll actually attack it. So they usually circulate throughout the blood, but will enter the body's tissues if an invader isn't detected. So they flow through our blood, but if we notice that there's an invader within our body, they'll actually go to that spot because they can detect that. And then our white blood cells, okay, or we'd call them phagocytes or macrophages or macrophages, and I'm just going to write that down really quick just so you know, okay? Kind of the same thing, it's just a form of phagocytes or phagocytes, okay? And we also have macrophages. And I want you to know about macrophages, okay? Oops, that's supposed to be a G. Okay, so macrophages. So white blood cells are responsible for eating these foreign particles and then they engulf them, okay? So once engulfed, the phagocyte or the macrophages breaks the foreign particles apart in organelles, okay? And so if we have a virus, for example, we'll just see the pictures. You see the cell before infection and the cell after, and we'll notice that it has a bunch of tiny bumps all over it. Well, if it enters the body, basically what it's going to do is it's going to hijack that particular organelle, and it's going to turn the cell into a virus-making factory. And these viruses can spread quite quickly as they're so tiny as well. They're very microscopic. But the cell will eventually burst, and then it releases thousands of viruses to infect new cells. So they attack your cells. They build on them. The cell eventually can't handle it. It bursts, and then they spread out and they diffuse, and they can go and affect other cells as well. So again, the interferon. Okay, so virus infected by the cells release interferon when an invasion occurs. I'm not going to go too much into that. But back to the white blood cells. Now these are important, these T cells. You're going to want to know the difference between T and B cells. So T cells are often called the natural killers, okay? And they basically recognize infected human cells and cancer cells. So they'll attack these infected cells and they'll quickly kill them and then continue to search for more cells to kill. So basically if they detect that, these T cells, they're going to go and they're going to kill them, okay? And that's their job. So T cells are the killers, and you want to remember that. Now, this is another thing you're going to want to understand is what is inflammatory response, or inflammatory response, So basically what happens is we have an injured body cell, and it's going to release chemical called histamines, okay, which begin inflammatory response. And remember, to inflame means to make large, or it's going to increase in size. So what happens is the capillaries dilate, and that's where oxygens and carbon dioxide and other things can diffuse into the blood system. Okay, and they're single-walled vessels, part of our circulatory system. But really, cryogens released reach the hypothalamus and the temperature rises. So pain receptors are going to activate, and then the white blood cells are actually going to flock to the infected area like sharks on blood, we would say. So if you notice that right over here in this picture, you just look here, we have inflammatory response here. So white blood cells are flocking to that area. We're going to get heat, it's going to get warm, and then we're going to get swelling as well in that area. Now there's two divisions of the immune system, okay? So the effects of the white blood cells, known as, we're going to call them macrophages, and then the T cells, which are the natural killers, is called the cell-mediated immune system, okay? So those are the things that are going to attack the cells, and they're going to kill them. They're just going to engulf them and just blow them apart. So the other half of the immune system is called the antibody-mediated immunity. So it basically means that it's controlled by antibodies, and those are the ones that are also going to we build up that fights immunity, or it actually doesn't fight immunity, it creates immunity within our body, and it builds this immunity so they remember what those foreign invaders look like, and they sense them, so anytime they come in, they can attack them as well. So this is what represents really what we call our third line of defense. So these are antibodies, like I said. So the most infections never make it past the first and second level of defense, but sometimes these things do happen. So those that do, though, they trigger a production and the release of antibodies within our body. If you take a look at the picture, we have two antigens binding, okay, at the end of the antibody, which looks like a Y. So basically what happens is the proteins latch on, damage clump, and they slow the foreign particles and invaders that were in our system. So then each antibody binds only to one specific binding site. So and that's also known as an antigen. So if you look right here, okay, one binding site, well, that's an antigen, and it has to fit right there, and they bind to that antibody. And those are called antigens. So I'll just put that there, okay? So antibody production, though, how do we produce these things? Okay, so white blood cells, basically, they're just going to gobble up the invading particles and then they're going to break them up. Okay, so then what they're doing is they're slowing the particle pieces, or they show the particle pieces to T cells, those natural killers, and then they're going to identify the pieces and they find specific B cells to help, and those are the helpers. So we have the natural killers, the T cells, and the natural helpers, the B cells. And basically what the B cell's job is, they're going to help by producing antibodies that are equipped to find specific particle and attach. So B cell's job is to produce antibodies so that those antibodies can attach to the foreign invaders and they can actually break them apart as well. So this is kind of our third line of defense. This is how this works. So immunity, though, okay, if we look at immunity, it's new particles take longer to identify, and a person remains ill until a new antibody can be crafted. So basically the body has to craft this antibody or else we're going to continue to be sick. So then what happens with old particles, they're quickly recognized and a person never may become ill from the invader again. So now what we would say is if they're not ill and they can never be ill again, then we would say that this person is now immune. Just have a little graph showing exposures, not overly important at this point. So what is immunity? So basically it is resistant to disease causing organisms or harmful substances by definition. And there's two types we're going to look at, and those are active immunity and passive immunity. So active immunity, you produce the antibodies. Okay? In your body, you produce them. So your body's been exposed to an antigen in the past, either through two things. Exposure to the actual disease causing the antigen. You fought it, you won, you remembered it. Okay, so we recognize it. The T cells are killers, and then the B cells produce antibodies that are actually going to attach the antigen, and they're going to break it apart. And then planned exposure to form an antigen that has been killed or weakened. So you detected it, you eliminated it, and you remembered it. And so remember, these antibodies remember. And so when we remember them, then we can attack them. And the B cells produce the antibodies, the T cells are the killers. Now, we have things like vaccines, and you're going to want to know this. So antigens are deliberately introduced into the immune system. So these are the bad, these antigens aren't good. And they're actually going to bind to the antibodies, okay, on those receptors. But they produce immunity, these vaccines, okay? So the antigens actually come in and they produce the immunity. But because the bacteria has been killed or weakened, minimal symptoms occur. So we're not going to get really sick or anything, but we will feel some minimal symptoms at times. So have eradicated or severely limited several diseases from the face of the earth, such as polio and smallpox. And that's what these vaccines have actually done, because it builds our immunity towards those particular diseases. Now, how long does active immunity last? Well, it depends on the antigen, really. So some disease-causing bacteria multiply into new forms that our body doesn't recognize. So this requires an annual vaccination. So things like the flu shot. And I don't know if you guys have had flu shots. I know I've had a few. But then we have booster shots as well. And this reminds the immune system of the antigen. It's just kind of a mental note to our body that, hey, there's this antigen, we want to remember it. So that boosts our memory, or our cell's memory of that particular antigen. And then those are things that we might take, like a booster shot for chickenpox. Like, remember throughout the lifetime that this is chickenpox, and anytime it comes in, we want to attack it, kill it, eliminate it, so that we can move forward and be healthy. So, the question, Do you think the flu is no big deal? Well, let's think again because we're going to look at some of the deadly strains. So in 1918, a particularly deadly strain of the flu called the Spanish influenza, it spread across the globe. It infected actually 20% of the human population and it killed 5%. And this is across globally. So which came out to be about 100 million people. Okay, so that's one form of the flu, and we actually have various forms of the flu, but it is a big deal, so we need that immunity in our body. So do we get all the possible vaccines we can? Well, all of the Center of Disease Control recommends certain vaccines. A lot of people go without them, and those especially susceptible include travelers and students. So when you travel, and sometimes students, especially when there's stressful situations and the immune system's low, we're more susceptible to get these particular diseases. Now the second thing we're going to talk about is passive immunity. So this means that you don't produce the antibodies. So a mother will pass on immunities to her baby during pregnancy through what organ? Okay, so through the thymus. Okay, so the antibodies will protect the baby for a short period of time following birth while its immune system develops. So this basically lasts until the antibodies die and then start producing them on your own. But we have 4 things I want you to remember. These are going to be important to remember. So there's naturally acquired active immunity. So this is you building this up. And it's naturally acquired, it just happens. So the strawberry tongue is often a symptom of scarlet fever. So once you've had scarlet fever, you're not going to get it again. And that's because your body's going to build immunity against that disease. So that's naturally acquired active immunity. Okay, your body naturally builds that. Okay, and it just naturally happens. But on the other side of this acquired active immunity is artificially acquired active immunity. So basically, we take the hepatitis V vaccine, okay, and it works in teens. But this basically what's going to do is provide artificial immunity based on an external source. So then that hepatitis virus is cultivated by infecting yeast cells. Okay, but basically what we're doing is we're preventing this and we're creating that immunity or disease defense using artificial methods and using an artificial vaccine to do it. And so it's not done in natural ways. We actually have to get it injected into us. But then there's naturally acquired passive immunity, which I talked about with the baby. As long as the baby continues to breastfeed, they're basically immune to all these other diseases that the mother's immune from. And then artificially acquired passive immunity is the last one to talk about. So let's just take a look at the picture down there. You're going to see some snake venom, okay, being poured into a cup. So what's going to actually happen here is we're going to take the snake venom, we're going to inject it into cows and horses, and that's going to create antibodies, okay, which are they're going to help to bind and engulf those viruses and stuff and pathogens. But then what we do is we're actually going to call these antibodies within these animals antitoxins. And then the antitoxins, okay, is basically going to be removed from the animal's blood. And then what we do is we flip it and we use it for immunity in people who are bitten by the type of poisonous snake. And it actually works to cure them from that particular venom or invader. So we have some immune disorders. So things like allergies. Okay, so the immune system mistakenly recognizes harmful foreign particles as serious threats. So what it's going to do is it's going to launch an immune response, and it's going to cause us to sneeze, give us a runny nose, and watery eyes. And I have allergies, and that's part of the reason why I'm probably congested and I sound nasally and stuff. It's because I can never breathe out my nose. But we use these things called antihistamines, and what that does is it blocks the effect of histamines and it brings relief to allergy sufferers. So we take allergy pills, that's basically an antihistamine, okay? So just a little more information on acquired immune deficiency syndrome. This is another type of immune disorder. So it's caused by human immunodeficiency virus. It was discovered in 1983, which you don't need to really know, but specifically targets and kills T cells, which are our natural killers. Imagine if we didn't have those, then what's going to stop us from preventing these diseases from taking over our body? But because normal body cells are unaffected, the immune response is not launched, so we won't recognize it as well. Then other things like a modern plague that's occurred, well, it's the AIDS virus. and or HIV, and it doesn't kill you, it cripples your immune system, but then it actually builds into AIDS eventually. But what's going to happen is it's going to shut down your immune system, and basically we can't defend against it, so therefore it's life-threatening. And so we just see here in the graph, just basically AIDS is spread by sexually transmitted diseases and blood transfusion, contaminated needles. And you can see around the world, looking at these maps, the areas where high infected rates are within the world. So in Canada, we're looking pretty good. We seem to do a good job at protecting ourselves against this. But if you look at some of the other countries, and it might have to do with socioeconomic conditions and such, and social issues, you're going to see some variation, or you're going to see some increase in the particular disease in that area. But anyways, guys, that is the immune system in a breeze through. I know it's going to seem like a long screencast. I do apologize about the length again. Typically we chunk them, we make them smaller, but there's some heavy material here, a lot of material to talk about. Main points is I want you to remember the different types of immunity, both natural and active and passive, and active immunities as well. And I want you to remember the role of T cells being the killers, the B cells producing antibodies that are going to enclose, and what macrophages are and such. Okay, so that's our immune system. We have first line, second line, third line defenders within our body. Okay, those are going to be important to know as well. And so utilize those questions that are in the topic 2 outline, and hopefully this screencast has helped you to answer those. Anyways, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next one. Okay, bye.